Again, welcome to Aberdeen Science Centre's second STEM exchange. I'm Debbie, and today I'm joined by Marcel and Abby, and they're going to be talking about science, law, and ocean conservation. So I'm going to launch, or India is going to launch their poll, and then I'll pass over to Marcel and Abby to get started. So hopefully we'll start seeing some answers to those questions coming in, and yeah, I will stop sharing my screen at this point, Marcel, so that you can take control.
Ooh, that sounds exciting. I don't share screen. I need to share that one. Oh,
perfect.
You wait for the poll. Oh, look at this. Everything. Oh, I like the answers so far.
We have slides. We have a poll. Fantastic.
Okay.
Oh, someone vote for the shoes. Go on.
I wanted to, but I'm not allowed to vote.
I know we can't. We can't as hosts.
Okay.
There you go. I think we'll maybe end the poll there. You've got a bit of an idea of what everyone said. And I'm going to turn my camera off and mute and leave it to you two.
Okay. Right. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for spending your lunchtime with us. I'll introduce myself. I'm a professor of chemistry, and I run something called the Marine Biodiscovery Centre, where we try and discover new drugs from the oceans. I was involved in a large European project, and as part of that, I got involved in a United Nations process called the Conservation and Sustainable Use of Biodiversity of Areas Beyond National Jurisdiction. Very long title, often just referred to as the Ocean Treaty. And we'll tell you a lot more about what that's all about. And as it says, I've worked on a lot of different delegations, a lot of different meetings, try and present science to policymakers over the last 7 years or so. I'll pass on to Abby.
Great. Hi, everyone. So my name's Abby Brown. I'm a professor in intellectual property law at the University of Aberdeen. So I do a lot of work on patents. But my main interest is the intersection between different legal fields. That might be human rights, that might be sustainable development, environmental law, climate change, and how that ties in with intellectual property. So many societal challenges can be responded to with innovation, but do the laws actually talk to each other? I write lots of long, boring intellectual books on this. There's one there on the screen. I also used to be a practicing lawyer for many years. And with Marcel, I've had the chance to be working on a particular marine biodiversity treaty that we're going to be touching on as a base for what we have been doing and how all of us can have an opportunity in working with and trying to save the oceans. And we've done our polls through the excellent efficiency of our team. So thank you. Marcel, you may click on.
Okay, so nice picture here of an anglerfish. And really what we're talking about here is that marine life isn't protected at all on 40% of the planet. And that seems like a very big part of the planet for it not having any kind of legal or other protections of marine life. There's a lot of stuff out there. It's the biggest part of the biosphere. And again, we keep thinking about, you know, the Amazon rainforest and things like that. But actually, the oceans are the biggest part of the biosphere, the biggest volume of the globe where life can exist. So Abby can explain this bit here.
Sure. So yes, I love this map. So basically, as I explained this to Marcel, and if you're a scientist, I apologize to you. But basically, what we're particularly interested in here is that there's lots of big bits in the middle of the sea, which are unregulated, and they are the oceans beyond national jurisdiction. And the law of the sea basically works out from land. So there's a bit out from land which is protected and a further bit out from land which is protected. And they're the bits which are colored in different shades of brown on the screen. And everything else is not the subject of a clear international agreement. And because, as you noted, the oceans are mysterious and fascinating, and maybe because there's a view they could be a cash cow, it's been so important to get involved in how, if we are going to regulate all of the oceans, exactly how that should be. Marcel, please.
Okay. So we always think about marine life existing at the surface, but again, it goes right down to the very deepest parts of the ocean. We now know that life exists right down to 11,000 meters. We've had bacteria from that depth. And what we need the oceans for? Well, half of the oxygen in the atmosphere comes from the oceans. So again, it's the biggest contributor to global climate recycling and climate generation of oxygen. It also draws down a huge amount of carbon dioxide, and the more it takes in, the more acidic the ocean becomes, and also the less it's able to take in the future. Again, so it's very important to consider the fact that the climate is changing, and therefore carbon dioxide needs to go somewhere, and most of it at the moment is going into the oceans. We think of it as a carbon sink as well. So a lot of that carbon is tied up for maybe 10,000 years or more by sinking to the bottom of the ocean. There's a lot of biology behind that, but it's an important place where carbon meets its final resting place, basically. But literally for 10,000 years, it may be sitting at the bottom of the ocean. And we think of it as a place for living resources. You might be going out for fisheries and other things that are important to humans for food and other things. So again, marine life is really critical to us all. So just to describe the different types of marine environments. So we're interested in looking at different marine environments for drug discovery. That's our main goal. Also for enzymes to make industrial processes cleaner and greener. So basically having chemical processes replaced by biological processes. What you see here, then, people are talking about things like hot vents, where you can find organisms that live at 300 degrees centigrade, or you can have bacteria living almost 1,500 meters below the ocean crust. You can have cold seeps, hot seeps, coral reefs, etc. So it's beautiful places that you can go and investigate. And again, if any of you are interested, if you go to this report at the bottom, the Royal Society Future Ocean Resources Report, it gives you a very nice mapping tool to look at the different ocean environments. And I really love this particular tool to look at. And again, the report itself is interesting. It gives you a description of what we're talking about today from the scientific perspective, and also the potential of the damaging influence of seabed mining. So our work is basically starting off with sampling materials from the deep ocean, for instance here in the Mariana Trench, looking for the biological resources that come from that, in particular bacteria that we're interested in, and some fungi as well. We do something with that, we get some new chemicals out of that. We test them for typically biological activity against disease, and then it takes a long stage to get to commercialization. So at the moment we have a couple of things that are at the stage of going from the testing phase to the next stage, which is the trying to make enough of the materials using other processes. So again, for epilepsy and Alzheimer's disease right now, we have a couple of compounds that are going right the way through to testing beyond animal testing, and going to the stage where they have to try and make a lot of it using chemical processes. And again,
and if I can just come in on that. Oops, sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, there you go. So commercialization, I think this is the point of where Marcel and I really work together, but from very different angles. So Marcel was very important. And from the law of the sea, which is what is so interesting and so complex, all countries have to offer you the right to get a patent. And what is really important is to ensure that you can get a patent for the really clever work that Marcel is talking about, but you don't get a patent for the bits of plankton. I know, I'm sorry, Marcel, it's how I explain it. The bits of plankton you get out the sea, because they are there, they are, well, we'll explore it. Perhaps they belong to everyone, and they certainly don't belong to Marcel. Marcel's clever work belongs to Marcel.
Really, why would you use ocean resources or marine resources in the first place? And like I said, the kind of products that we can get out of there are things. My particular interest is in medicines and research tools and enzymes for cleaner and greener processes. But people have also developed particular things like, you know, biomaterials or face creams and nutritional products. And the reason you would do that is because you might get either better performance or better economics. But what we really find in the ocean is we find products that have completely new properties. We might have, for instance, an enzyme that does something that nothing else can do. And that's been the case for several examples. Molecules that have unprecedented chemical structures and activities in treating disease that no one has ever seen before. Materials with properties, again, that no one's seen before. And a great example of that is the sort of the muscle threads that connect muscles to the rocky substrate. And those are incredibly strong, and people are looking at how those materials are made and use them for new kinds of glue, for instance. Here's the case study. So people have looked for drugs for a long time. The discovery was made some time ago in 1986 of a compound from a sponge that was incredibly potent against cancer, and it gave a lifetime extension of something like 86%. So the animals were able to live for much, much longer when they were given this drug when they had cancer. It took 10 years to make the material. It's the most complex molecule I've ever seen. They made derivatives of this molecule over a 5-year period, and one of them was found to be much more active and much simpler to make. And then many years later, it was approved in the US for colon cancer. And again, it's not a blockbuster drug that would be $1 billion per year, but nevertheless, it is a huge advance on the treatment of certain types of cancer that's happened over the period here of 24 years that we know of. So it's not a quick process, but again, quite often it's worth the effort because of the final result. And Abby, can you join in again?
I think I'm back.
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. I'm so sorry about last time. So I don't know where I got to, but I'll just say a little bit more about patents because I like talking about patents. Where we see we work along this quite long pipeline from identification in the pre-market stage. It takes months, years to move along. A lot of the products at the moment are coming mainly from the reef, not from the open ocean, but as Marcel has said, there are increasing opportunities for that. And more of the products we're seeing are anti-cancer, but increasingly moving into analgesics and antivirals. And particularly from what Marcel was saying before, is to get a product which goes to market. And a patent, I prefer patent, not patent. People do say patent. A patent gives you the power to stop other people using your innovation. And that can be a very effective way of attracting investment to able to move along the pharmaceutical pipeline. And it can also mean that because you have been so clever and you've invested so much and taken so many risks to bring it to market, that no one can come along and effectively copy you. That's a very good thing. But there's a risk perhaps that one might get patents too early in the pharmaceutical development pipeline. So maybe you're getting the control over the plankton itself, which is probably not such a good thing. Maybe a risk that making it too easy to get a patent might encourage unsustainable working with the genetic resources. And also, and this is particularly topical today, time of COVID, really does develop a wonderful magical saving drug. Then you stop anyone else using it unless they pay you a lot of money, or unless perhaps, and obviously it's unclear what is happening precisely at the moment in the COVID vaccine supply chain, or perhaps the patent owner or information controller decides not to charge you. And that's great, that's actually their choice. The law gives them the right to refuse to supply. So that's the intersection that I think is so important here. And it is so fantastic for Marcel and his colleagues to develop new drugs along this pipeline. Not all of them make it, because not all of them make it. There should be the right to monetize and be rewarded. But does that bring too much private control into science, which perhaps should be more freely available to everyone? So thank you, Marcel.
A great example of that is the recent discovery of a C-squared compound that is incredibly potent in treating COVID. So basically, it's a drug rather than a vaccine. And again, that's being progressed along the pipeline very rapidly right now. Okay, so Abby, you talk about UNCLOS if you want.
Great. So this is us moving from science into law, but I think, as we've been saying, a lot of this is things that law and science are able to work closely together. We do have a treaty from 1982. If you like law, it's really long, it's got lots of clauses, but it didn't deal with everything. It didn't deal, in fact, with that bit that we were talking about in the middle of the sea. It left this unclear. And as there's been increasing recognition, both from the environmental side, but perhaps also from the opportunity of drug development, a realization that there's stuff there. It is dark and mysterious. but stuff lives there, and valuable stuff lives there that can be to the benefit of humanity and also should be sustained. So there has been now a really quite ongoing process to create a new instrument within UNCLOS, as it's called, the Law of the Sea Convention, to address the wider bits of the ocean. It's a long, long, long name, which we'll see in a forthcoming. Many people call it the Ocean Treaty, and I think that's a very good term. Marcel, please. Is this me? It's me. I'll carry on.
Yeah, I think so.
So this, fantastic. So this continues to complicate, frankly, the legal regimes which are applying to the ocean. So have the main convention of the law does cover bits next to land and a little further out from land, if we like, but it also doesn't cover the bits beyond that, and also it only applies in different ways if you go vertically rather than horizontally. So many things are not regulated. If you are close to land, indeed if you are on land, then there are legal treaties which apply, notably the Convention on Biological Diversity. And it also has a goal of environmental protection and sustainable development. What we also have floating around in this space, but not as much as I'd like to, is the international IP regime, which I hope you heard me mention before. So countries have to give innovators the right to apply for a patent. And that, which is WTO, which perhaps we've been hearing about a bit more in the media more recently, that means most countries are a member of the WTO, and if you don't meet your WTO requirements, then that can lead to trade sanctions, which you've also been hearing about a little bit more in the media. So that means that if we have a clash between the sustainability and protection goals we might see in the CBD and the sustainability goals which we might be trying to see developed in the new UNCLOS work, but this might seem to clash with the idea of, well, if you make a patent, you get the right to complete. They're just not talking to each other. And even before almost not talking to each other, and which is why Marcel's contribution has been so invaluable, often you've just got a bunch of lawyers. Now, lawyers are great, but lawyers do not have the expertise that Marcel has. So to have Marcel and his colleagues, for example, in the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative, bring to say, this is what we do, this is what we can build, and this is what we see the risks are, is a really important contribution. And what I've been trying to say is we don't only need environmental lawyers, although they are essential. We don't just need international law of the sea lawyers. We also need some intellectual property lawyers, just to ensure that we are aware of how we could create this very sharing-based treaty to protect the ocean, but someone's going to come along and say, I want a patent and I want to control everything made by the plankton. And if they don't talk to each other, then we can have a big collision rather than trying to work out a very flexible approach, which can certainly be done to be consistent with all goals. Well, that's certainly what I've been trying to argue. So that's me for now. Marcel, next slide, please.
Okay, I'm trying to get on to the next slide. Hang on, something's happened. There we go.
The joys of technology.
Yep. Did you ready?
Okay, so just to, is this me or is it you?
Yeah, it says
I'll continue briefly first of all. Marcel will jump in. Excellent. I have your pictures over the markings. So this belonged from the fact that it was open ocean treaty trying to regulate the areas beyond national jurisdiction. And there is a huge fight, which frankly in a lot of our work we've been trying to get around. But there's certainly a view that the marine genetic resources, the plankton, are freedom of the high seas. No one controls them. I tend to think of this as almost piracy. First come, first served. Whoever gets there, they can take it. No one owns them, so anyone can own them. And there's a differing view, common heritage of mankind, which is more that, no, they really do belong to everyone, and they must continue to belong to everyone. And the differing views which one takes to this have actually proved quite a big obstacle to any progress in negotiating the Ocean Treaty, but particularly in relation to the view of you get the marine genetic resources, you build them into something else, you build into this life-saving drug which reflects so much your investment in your lab, in building your career. And so it seems quite fair that you should be able to control it. So many, many fights are often tied in with particular views are often taken if you come from more of an environmental viewpoint, if you come from a more coastal region, often differing views from countries at different stages of economic development. But I think the main view has been to try to work out how we can have a pragmatic, effective solution to developing new treaty, which will work for industry and will work for science and will be fair. But Marcel, anything you would like to add that, because you have been working in that space from the scientific angle longer?
No, I think given the time, we should move on to the next few slides. I think this is just saying that the process was taken to the next level by the UN in 2015. They had the initial stages of the process, which is about the what I would call the essay plan, the drafting of the bits that were going to be in the law, which was then followed in 2018, I think, or 2017, it says, just at the end of 2017, of the decision to actually draft the new text of the law, and which is what we're involved in right now. So yeah, I mean, going out to the UN is quite a privilege. It's wonderful to be able to get in there, and we were guests of the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, which is an intergovernmental organization. And the difference between that and a non-governmental organization is that an IGO is mandated by the United Nations to exist. So this is something that means that if you go to these meetings with a badge from the IUCN, it means that you have a special privilege of being part of that delegation, as well as the IUCN being next in line to speak after the national blocks have spoken, and the countries in the national blocks will speak, and then you're next on the list to speak, which is a real advantage to making statements and things like that, because you're early on the list. Is Abby here? To show she was really there.
Yep, I made it too highly exciting. We can move on quickly if we don't need to do pictures of me. We do have a whale, which is quite nice as well.
So just to
so
explain how it
what I
works.
certainly find, sorry. I did, sure. So what I find really fascinating is trying to work out, I must confess, I've been rude about a few treaties in my time. So it's been really fascinating to see how they are developed. There's lots of negotiation between states, obviously, in the big chamber, which we'll see some pictures of shortly. Some of that takes place between regions, for example, the EU and CARICOM, but there's also many other people who are there trying to advise, trying to help, which can be particularly important, maybe for smaller countries or countries who have a particular area of expertise, but don't know so much about another angle. So IUCN, who we mentioned, also the High Seas Alliance have been involved, and observers, say, from other international organizations are often there. There are big meetings, there's side meetings, there are side meetings. A lot is done over coffee, it would be said, and that's been quite revealing, because although there have been online negotiations taking place and discussions since then, it obviously has to be slightly more formalized. But what's been really evident, I think, is how willing people are to learn, to listen, particularly to hear the scientific voice from Marcel, and indeed hear of the intellectual property voice. I think it's fair to say that before I and a couple of colleagues started nagging people to think about this, then it wasn't there. And it's been interesting to see how one can try to widen and try to influence the UN process. Thank you.
And yeah, sometimes you get to speak. And that's that was quite scary. What happens at the time is that you're connected to multiple channels of communications. In this case, we're connected to a shared document. I think we were using a Skype chat, and we were trying to listen to the conversation going on through translators as well. So it was quite exciting. And we wrote a statement on the fly, which I then had to deliver, which I did with my usual super speed speaking, and I had to slow down for the translators and say it all again, which was quite caused a bit of laughter in the chamber. So it's kind of interesting to do that. But it's quite terrifying when you're stuck in a room with maybe 500 people from all the countries of the world and trying to make a statement about science. There you go, Abby. This is so you can explain the side events and how that works.
That's the big room. And the one on the right, and the one on the left is, you can apply to have an official side event, which is just a sort of a breakout room, which we're now obviously so familiar with. But that really gives the chance to speak to country delegates, to speak to other IGOs, and say, we think this is an important factor, we think you should think about. It tends to be a slow path. People are, of course, going to change their mind overnight, but it's a really interesting way of trying to embed some ideas and then have further conversations and see some ideas developing in the ongoing drafts which are being provided.
Yeah, so it's taken 7 years, but we see the language changing from one thing, and to see the words, scientific words included. So concepts and ideas you've introduced are being included in the draft treaty, which is really, you know, it gives you the feeling that you're doing something that's useful and worthwhile.
And I think it's also interesting to see how that, because one can think, well, you know, how do you save the oceans using science? That's a big goal. And I think to show there's lots of different paths that one can take towards that. And one of those was an event at the Royal Society of Edinburgh. So that's a picture taken there. And there's a lot of delegates there and a lot of people from other influencers as well. So that was lots of fun that day. Yeah,
it was, what is it? January last year, I guess. So we could still move around freely.
Just before lockdown, yeah.
Oh, there you are.
Well, there, just in case I forgot.
So the kind of things that we do to provide advice, and we do that also through something called the Deep Ocean Stewardship Initiative, which is a wonderful bottom-up, not really a lobbying organization, but it provides neutral scientific advice on deep sea science, and we provide information on things like, you know, how diverse is marine life? What do we know about it? What's good practice in the science that we do? How are things exploited and used for commercial benefit? How much benefit is there to be gained? How hard is it to find a sample all the way from the seafloor to a commercial application? And having done that research, it took me 3 days to figure out how something went from the seafloor to an application. I think, sorry, a second. How to work on capacity building, and how certain scientific advantages might affect the new treaty, and that, for instance, is the use of digital sequence information or DNA sequence information that's available on databases. And there's lots of online events right now.
A really fascinating point.
Yep. So there's at the moment we're stuck in this period of not being able to travel, but there'll be many informational events on this treaty in this period. There's another one next week on. It's called the Nobel Conversations or something, Nobel Discussions, run by the Nobel Peace Institute in Oslo, and that's going on about what's it called, institutional arrangements next week. So again, something that's more for the lawyers than the scientists, but again, it's an interesting conversation to carry on. Oh, Abby, go for it.
Yeah, so this is something that we really can all be involved in to contribute to saving the oceans. Marcel and I were thinking about how we can really continue to raise awareness, not just the people who have been lucky enough to go to the UN and seek to influence or work with a group of scientists with links to delegates. And we thought, well, why don't we do a song? And sometimes you say something that...
Okay. I can explain in the meantime when Abby reconnects. We were lucky enough to get our local composer, Paul Mealer at the University of Aberdeen, involved in writing the music. And he got his lyricist, Graham Davies, who's a world-renowned poet, to write the words. You can see the words there. What we're trying to do at the moment is to try and get the Song of the Ocean performed by singers from all around the world in a virtual choir to join together. And the next stage will be to have have choirs from all over the world sing it in their own languages with their own distinct interpretation of the words in the song. That would be wonderful. At the moment, we have a call out for people to sing. So if you look up DOSI, or Dozy Song of the Ocean, you will find it very quickly, and you can submit your voice part if you want to join in, or if you have any knowledge of other choirs that might want to sing along, please do pass it on to them. So we have had events at the University of Aberdeen, and here's one of them. Oh, hang on, that's the end really to say. You can go and look at this website, but the point here was that we had 2018, we had wonderful days of sunshine in June, and we invited delegates from the United Nations and scientists and policymakers from around Europe and the rest of the world. And they came to Aberdeen. We had some serious discussions, but we also had a good time. And the good time was had by, for instance, being able to access the Scottish research vessel Scotia that was in the harbour at the time. And I was able to get access to the vessel for the delegates to see really what science at sea is really like. So it was rather wonderful event. And again, our own website there is given at the bottom, gives much more information on the things we've discussed. And Abby, you want to add to that?
I'm not sure we've got Abby back yet.
I'm so sorry. Join in singing the song if you would like to. It is the most amazing experience. That's the only final words I would make. And I think it does make a difference.
Yeah, it does.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much.